Have you ever felt like your life is a magnet for chaos? That wherever you go, drama follows? As if there's some invisible signal attached to you, drawing in emotional manipulators, energy-draining personalities, or people who seem to thrive on confusion and conflict? Meanwhile, others move through the same environments, walk down the same streets, work in the same offices, but they remain untouched, protected, even invisible to these psychological predators. Maybe you've looked around at your life, at the patterns that keep repeating and whispered to yourself in exhaustion, why does this always happen to me? Why do people like that keep finding me? What is it about me that makes me a target? If you've ever asked these questions, if you've ever found yourself drained by others, manipulated, emotionally exhausted after every conversation, then stay with me. Because what you're about to hear may be the moment a quiet switch flips inside you. You might think this is about bad luck, or just being too nice, or about having poor boundaries. You've probably even blamed yourself, telling yourself you should toughen up, fight back, or stop being so sensitive. But what if I told you that the answer lies not in fighting louder or building walls, but in something far more subtle and far more powerful? Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, spent his life studying the invisible mechanisms of the human mind. One of his most profound discoveries was this: we don't just attract experiences randomly, we attract them according to the patterns we carry inside us. Toxic people don't choose their targets arbitrarily. They are like heat-seeking missiles, drawn not by what you say or even what you do, but by what you radiate unconsciously. They are skilled at picking up on emotional wounds you haven't healed yet, and they are drawn to them not by cruelty alone, but because your unresolved pain resonates with their own unconscious needs for control, chaos, or validation. Think of it like this. Emotional predators have a sixth sense. They sense the cracks, the leaks, the small fractures in your emotional foundation. The parts of you still aching to be loved, still afraid to be rejected, still longing to be seen, even at the cost of your peace. If you're someone who always tries to keep the peace, if you avoid conflict to keep things calm, if you give more than you receive, if you constantly explain yourself, apologize too quickly, or try to win others' approval, then you might be carrying those cracks, subtle signals that tell the world, there is something in me that is still unhealed. Toxic people detect these signals the same way a shark detects blood in the water. Not with intention, not always even with malice, but with instinct. They don't necessarily think, I'm going to control this person. They just feel where they can dominate, where they can pull strings, where they can push limits. And once they've found the opening, they use it. And that's why the cycle repeats. It's not because you're weak. It's because, without realizing it, you're playing a role in a psychological script you didn't know you were holding. One written long ago, maybe in childhood, maybe through trauma, maybe through years of being told to be nice, don't make trouble, or keep everyone happy. But here's the truth. You can't fix this by fighting back louder. You can't fix this by cutting people off and hoping it never happens again. You can't fix this by building stronger walls or memorizing more self-help mantras. The only way to stop attracting toxic people is to stop offering them emotional access in the first place. And that starts with something most people avoid their whole lives: integrating the shadow. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Let that sink in. The parts of yourself that you have not faced, your fears, your insecurities, your desire for approval, your hidden shame, those are not just personal. They become energetic frequencies. And those frequencies are what predators feel, even when you say nothing. So if you want to stop being a target, the real work is not about changing other people. It's about changing the emotional atmosphere around you. The way you vibrate. The way your energy says, I know who I am and I am not available for this. When someone has integrated their shadow, meaning they have faced and accepted the parts of themselves they used to hide or hate, they become emotionally closed to manipulation. Not because they've built a fortress, but because there are no longer cracks for others to slip into. This is what Jung referred to as psychic integrity, a kind of invisible solidity, a frequency that toxic people can't hook into. Psychic integrity doesn't come from perfection. It comes from self-ownership, from knowing your triggers, from recognizing where your emotional boundaries start and end, not just in words, but in presence, in your posture, in your silence. And here's the paradox. When you stop needing approval, you stop attracting those who punish you for wanting it. When you stop fearing rejection, you stop drawing in people who weaponize your fear of being abandoned. When you stop hiding your shadow, no one can use it against you anymore. This transformation doesn't come from repeating affirmations or reading endless books. It comes from turning inward, from asking, where do I still give too much? Where do I still fear being disliked? Where do I still feel I have to perform to be loved? These are not comfortable questions, but they are powerful ones. Because once you see where the shadow lives inside you, once you begin to meet those parts not with shame, but with compassion, once you begin to stop abandoning yourself to please others, something changes. Your energy becomes solid, grounded, unavailable for games. And toxic people, they feel it, not consciously, but instinctively, and they move on, not because you push them away, but because they realize you're not their type anymore. You don't have the same vulnerabilities. You're not hungry for attention. You're not trying to prove anything. And that is the ultimate freedom. To be unavailable for manipulation because you no longer manipulate yourself. So if you've ever asked, why do toxic people always seem to find me? The answer may not lie in what's wrong with you, but in what inside you still waits to be accepted. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your invitation to heal, to integrate, to become someone no longer drawn into other people's chaos. Not because you've built walls, but because you've built yourself. Have you ever met someone who instantly triggered something in you? Maybe it was anger, maybe it was fascination, or maybe a mix of both. They walked into the room and without saying a word, something inside you lit up or flared up. You felt tension, irritation, admiration, or discomfort, and you weren't even sure why. This is not random. According to Carl Jung, this reaction is not about the other person. It's about you. More specifically, it's about your shadow. In the previous part, we explored how toxic people are drawn to emotional wounds that remain unhealed within us. But now we need to go deeper. Because toxic people don't just sense pain, they sense projection. And projection is the invisible theater where our internal shadows get cast onto the world around us. Let's break this down. A projection happens when you disown a part of yourself. When you bury a thought, an emotion, or desire because you find it too shameful, too selfish, too intense, or too unacceptable. But that part doesn't die. It doesn't vanish. It goes underground into the unconscious, and from there, it starts to act. And here's the kicker. The more you deny it inside you, the more it appears outside you, you start seeing it in others. You start attracting it into your life. You feel haunted by a pattern, unaware that it is actually your own unconscious trying to speak. Imagine a person who prides themselves on being humble. They see arrogance in everyone. They despise loud confidence. It irritates them. But deep down, there is a buried part of them that wants to be seen, desperately, that wants to shine, to speak up, to be admired. But because they were taught it's wrong to want attention, they repressed it. And now that desire leaks out as judgment. This is projection. Now imagine someone who sees manipulation everywhere. They believe people are always playing games, but deep inside, they too manipulate. But they do it through passivity, through silence, through guilt. Yet, because they cannot admit this to themselves, they project it outward and see the world as a stage of manipulators. Projection is not always negative. Sometimes we project positive qualities too, onto people we admire, idolize, or feel drawn to without knowing why. We might be captivated by someone's boldness, charisma, or certainty, because they express a quality we've buried within ourselves. A part of us wants to embody what we've disowned. This is called positive projection, and it can be just as blinding. Now back to toxic people. Toxic people are not just creators of chaos, they are amplifiers of what's already unresolved. They poke, prod, trigger. They press on the psychological bruises that we pretend don't exist. Not because they know your story, but because your energy tells it for you. Here's where it gets deeper. The things that most disturb you about someone else, what you hate, obsess over, or can't stop talking about, almost always carry a hidden message. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Read that again, because this is a key that can unlock your entire emotional pattern. Let's say you can't stand someone's selfishness. Ask yourself, is there a part of me that never allows myself to be selfish even when I need to be? You hate someone's arrogance. Ask, do I silence my own pride so much that I project it outward? You resent someone's loudness. Ask, have I spent years shrinking myself to be liked? These aren't accusations, they're invitations. Invitations to uncover what you've hidden, not because it's evil, but because it was unsafe to show. Most of our projections were formed in childhood. Maybe you were told not to be angry, not to ask for too much, not to cry too loud, not to want attention, not to challenge authority. So you bury those instincts, but buried instincts don't die, they fester, they mutate, and they find their way back through the mirror of other people. This is why patterns repeat. You leave one controlling relationship and enter another. You escape a manipulative boss, only to find a new one with the same traits. You cut off a toxic friend, and soon meet their emotional twin in someone new. It's not because you're cursed, it's because the projection hasn't been resolved. As long as you continue to reject parts of yourself, those parts will continue to show up around you in louder, harsher forms until you finally face them. So, how do we begin? We start by asking brutally honest questions. What is it about this person that triggers me so much? What part of me might feel threatened, jealous, or diminished in their presence? What need or emotion have I refused to validate in myself? The key here is compassion. This is not a process of blaming yourself. It's about reclaiming the power you gave away. Because projection is not weakness, it's a survival mechanism. You projected because it was once safer than acknowledging the truth. But you're not that child anymore. You can now handle what you couldn't back then. When you reclaim your projections, something powerful begins to shift. The people who used to trigger you start losing their power. You begin to see through the performance. You stop personalizing their behavior. Most importantly, you stop reacting. And this is when toxic people begin to back off. Not because you told them to, but because you stopped dancing to the emotional rhythm they depend on. Remember, toxic people thrive on reaction. They throw emotional bait, a passive-aggressive comment, a guilt trip, a judgmental glance, and wait. If you take the bait, they gain power. If you over-explain, defend, or explode, they win. Because now it's about your reaction, not their behavior. But when you stop reacting, when you observe without absorbing, you break the cycle. This isn't passivity, it's mastery. And the foundation of this mastery is self-ownership. Once you see that the battlefield was never out there, but always in here, you stop fighting shadows. You start lighting candles instead. One by one, the unconscious becomes conscious. And with that awareness comes freedom. Because the truth is this, you are not being attacked by toxic people. You are being invited to notice what still lives unhealed inside you. And when you begin to notice, when you begin to reclaim, when you begin to integrate, you become someone different. You stop radiating the need to be validated. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop searching for love in places that offer only control. You become grounded. And grounded people are emotionally uninteresting to those who feed on chaos. Jung called this process shadow work. But make no mistake, this is not a mental exercise. This is a transformation of how you relate to yourself. It's about saying, I have anger, I'm not ashamed of it. I want attention, that's okay. I have a manipulative side. I choose not to use it. This is the heart of psychic integrity, the ability to hold your inner contradictions without collapsing. And here's the paradox. Once you accept your own darkness, the world becomes less dark. You no longer need to fear what others might reveal about you. Because you already know, you've already seen it, you've made peace. This is why projection ends, not when others change, but when you stop hiding from yourself. You stop casting your story outward and begin living it consciously. So far, we've explored how toxic people are drawn not simply to weakness, but to emotional wounds, especially the ones you've kept hidden, repressed, or disowned. You've learned that projections, those unconscious qualities you see in others, are often reflections of your own shadow. That what you criticize, hate, or obsess over in someone else might be a disowned part of yourself. That psychic predators don't just sense your pain, they sense your lack of awareness around that pain. But now we go a level deeper, because even after recognizing your patterns, even after identifying your projections, you may still find yourself trapped in the same exhausting dynamics. You know it's happening, you can name it. You've even told yourself to stop. And yet, you react, you fall into the trap. You replay the same emotional scripts, anger, defensiveness, guilt, appeasement, justification, and afterward, you feel hollow, depleted, ashamed. You tell yourself, I know better than this, but knowledge alone isn't enough. Why? Because toxic relationships are not just emotional, they're energetic ecosystems. And if you keep feeding them, even with awareness, they will keep growing. So here's the hard truth. As long as you keep responding to emotional bait, the drama will continue. Emotional predators don't need logic. They feed on energy. Let's be honest, toxic people don't thrive on facts. They thrive on reactions. They don't need to win the argument. They only need to get you involved. That's it. If they can get you to raise your voice, doubt yourself, explain endlessly, cry, panic, overcompensate, they've succeeded. Because now you're playing the game. You've entered their world, a world not based on truth, but on emotional chaos. And make no mistake, chaos is fuel. It blurs clarity, it breaks boundaries, it erodes self-trust. And most importantly, it distracts you from your own inner compass. Because here's what emotional predators fear most: your silence, your clarity, your neutrality. They don't fear confrontation. They fear non-engagement. They don't fear your anger, they fear your indifference. Because when you stop reacting, you stop feeding the game. And if you stop feeding it long enough, it starves. The drama triangle: victim, persecutor, rescuer. Psychologist Stephen Cartman described toxic interactions using what he called the drama triangle, a repeating loop of 3 roles. Victim: why does this always happen to me? Persecutor: this is your fault. You always do this. Rescuer: let me fix it. Let me save you. In unhealthy dynamics, people constantly switch between these roles. You might start as the rescuer, trying to help someone. Then they accuse you of controlling them, casting you as the persecutor. You get hurt, and suddenly you're the victim. Round and round it goes. It's not about who's right, it's about keeping the drama alive. Because as long as emotions stay high, attention stays locked. Toxic people often cycle through these roles with surgical precision. They victimize themselves to gain sympathy. They attack to regain control. They offer to help just enough to keep you engaged. And if you've got unhealed wounds, especially the need to be needed, the fear of being misunderstood, or the compulsion to fix others, you'll find yourself pulled in. Not by logic, but by emotional gravity. That's why the only way to break the triangle is to step out of it completely. And stepping out doesn't mean withdrawing in silence while still boiling with emotion inside. It means choosing non-participation. It means saying, I see the trap, and I no longer play this game. Recognition before reaction. Most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they react before they realize what's happening. So the first practical step is recognition. The moment your nervous system starts to spike, when your heart races, your chest tightens, your brain scrambles to explain yourself, that's your cue. That's your signal, not to argue, not to defend, not to explain, but to pause. Literally, just pause. Take a breath. Notice the tension. Recognize the pattern. Are you trying to prove your worth again? Are you reacting out of guilt? Are you explaining yourself to someone who has no intention of understanding you? Catch the pattern. Call it inwardly. This is bait. Don't bite. Because once you pause, you create space. And in that space, you regain power. Bait comes in many forms. Toxic people use a variety of emotional hooks. You've likely seen some of these. Passive-aggressive comments, veiled insults dressed as jokes. Silent treatment, withdrawal meant to provoke anxiety. Guilt tripping. After all I've done for you. Playing the victim. Turning the tables, making you the bad guy. Triangulation. Dragging third parties into the drama, gaslighting, questioning your memory, twisting the truth. The goal is always the same: destabilize you, make you react. And once you react, you're inside the loop again. But remember, you don't have to respond to every invitation. You don't have to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to convince someone who already decided to blame you. You don't have to fix a story that was designed to make you the villain. Neutrality is not weakness, it's mastery. Let's redefine a powerful word: neutrality. Neutrality doesn't mean being numb or indifferent. It means being centered. It's the stillness at the eye of the storm. It means choosing to observe rather than absorb, to witness without reacting, to hold your ground without raising your voice. Neutrality is what happens when you've made peace with your shadow, when you no longer seek validation from those who withhold it, when you no longer need to prove your goodness to those invested in your guilt. It's the energy that says, I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to protect my peace. And this energy is like kryptonite to emotional manipulators. They sense it, and they lose interest. Because without your reaction, their drama dies. Stop explaining, start holding. One of the most draining habits in toxic dynamics is over-explaining. You feel misunderstood, so you explain again, and again, and again. But here's the truth. You don't owe everyone an explanation, especially not to someone who already made up their mind about you, uses your words against you, doesn't listen to understand, only to attack. Over-explaining is often a trauma response, a fear of being seen as bad, wrong, or unworthy. But you are not obligated to educate someone who refuses to learn. Sometimes the most powerful statement is no statement at all. Not because you're hiding, but because you've chosen to hold your truth. And holding doesn't mean suppressing. It means standing firm. It means knowing what you know, even if no one else sees it. Internal boundaries are the real protection. We often think of boundaries as external, what we tell others. But the most powerful boundaries are internal. They are the silent contracts you make with yourself. I will not lose myself to prove myself. I will not explain myself to those who twist my words. I will not stay where I must shrink to be accepted. These boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about protection. Protection from self-betrayal. Because every time you overextend, over-apologize, or override your intuition to avoid conflict, you abandon yourself. And the more you abandon yourself, the more others will follow your lead. But the moment you choose self-loyalty over external harmony, everything begins to change. Your energy shifts. You become less available to drama, less reactive to manipulation, less hungry for approval. And toxic people, they feel it. They sense there's no more space to hook into, and they move on. Your calm is confrontation. You might wonder, but isn't staying silent letting them win? No. Your calm is the confrontation. Because silence, neutrality, and emotional sovereignty are weapons toxic people cannot fight. They don't know what to do with calm. They don't know how to escalate a situation that's no longer reactive. You remove the fuel. You break the pattern. You disarm the game. And in doing so, you regain your peace. Summary: how to starve the drama. Let's recap the essentials. Recognize the pattern pause before reacting. Name the emotional loop. Disengage, don't bite the bait. See the provocation for what it is. Choose silence or a grounded response. Practice internal boundaries. Define what you will and won't tolerate emotionally. Withdraw emotional energy. Don't explain. Don't fix. Don't defend. Just stand still. Hold your ground without performing. You don't need to prove your worth to those invested in your failure. Choose peace over participation. Every time you decline the invitation to chaos, you reclaim power. Final thought. The reason toxic dynamics are so exhausting is not just because of the other person. It's because of how much of yourself you give away in the process. You give your time. your attention, your energy, your peace, your sense of self. But you don't have to keep doing that. You can choose stillness. You can choose sovereignty. You can choose neutrality as a form of strength. Because when the game no longer entertains you, when the bait no longer hooks you, when your silence becomes louder than their chaos, they leave. Not because you fought them, but because you stopped feeding them. And in that space where drama once lived, peace can finally... So far, you've peeled back the layers. You've discovered how toxic people are drawn not just to kindness, but to unconscious vulnerability. You've seen how your unacknowledged wounds radiate outward, pulling in those who mirror your unresolved pain. You've learned that projection is the mechanism by which the shadow speaks, that what you see in others is often a reflection of what you've buried in yourself. You've learned to pause before reacting, to starve the drama by stepping out of the game. You've learned to stop explaining, to stand in inner neutrality, and to build boundaries that begin not with walls, but with self-loyalty. But even after all this, there is still one door left unopened. And that is the door to the shadow itself. Because you can't fully reclaim your power unless you face the part of you that gave it away in the first place. The shadow is not the enemy. We often imagine the shadow as a monster we must slay, a dark part of us that needs to be cured, healed, or removed. But Carl Jung said something radical. The shadow is a living part of the personality. It wants to be heard, not destroyed. Your shadow is not the enemy. It is the part of you that remembers your pain when you try to forget. It is the part that protected you by hiding what the world rejected. It is the container for your suppressed anger, shame, rage, desire, envy, and grief. And most of all, it is the keeper of your lost power. Because everything you disown, your assertiveness, your boundaries, your no, your voice, was placed in the shadow when it was too dangerous to express. But now that you are no longer a child, the very traits that once kept you safe are keeping you stuck. So the goal isn't to eliminate the shadow, the goal is to integrate it. To bring it into consciousness. To look it in the eye and say, I see you. I know why you're here. Let's walk together. What integration really means. Integration does not mean indulging in the shadow. It does not mean acting on every dark impulse. It means making space for it, listening to it, learning from it, owning it so that it stops owning you. Let's say you've spent your whole life trying to be nice, to be liked, to avoid conflict. But in doing so, you've repressed your anger. You've disowned your no. You've lost the ability to protect yourself. That anger didn't vanish. It went into the shadow, and from there, it leaks out. As resentment, passive aggression, self-hatred, people-pleasing, burnout. Integration means calling that anger home. Not to act it out, but to learn from it. Because anger is not evil, it is a signal. It tells you when something is off, when a boundary is being crossed, when you're abandoning yourself again. Without anger, you are exposed. You become a target for manipulation because you don't know when to say stop. Now imagine integrating that anger, not as aggression, but as protection, as presence, as clarity. This is integration. You don't become mean, you become whole. You don't become toxic, you become sovereign. You are not the mask, or the monster one. Of the reasons people avoid shadow work is because they're afraid of what they'll find. They believe that if they look inward long enough, they'll discover something unlovable, unforgivable, irredeemable. But that's not what happens. What you'll actually find is humanity. You'll find the scared child behind the rage, the hurt teenager behind the arrogance, the silenced voice behind the people-pleasing. And you'll realize the shadow was never evil. It was exiled. You didn't create it out of malice. You created it to survive. So be gentle with yourself. You are not the mask you wear for the world, but you are also not the monster you fear within. You are the one holding both. And when you can hold both, you become free. Wholeness is the end of manipulation. What makes a person manipulable? It's not weakness, it's fragmentation. It's the split between the self you show the world and the one you hide. The more split you are, the more confused you become about what you want, what you believe, what you deserve. That confusion creates space, space that toxic people exploit. They use your doubt against you. They mirror your guilt back to you. They magnify your shame until you shrink to fit it. But when you become whole, when you integrate the shadow, the fragmentation dissolves. Suddenly, there's nowhere for confusion to hide. You know who you are, you know where you stand, you know what is yours and what is not, and that clarity is impenetrable. You can't be manipulated by someone who offers what you no longer seek. You can't be guilt-tripped by someone who pokes a wound that no longer bleeds. You can't be gaslit by someone who questions a truth you've already owned. This is what it means to be psychically clean, to walk through the world with nothing to prove, nothing to hide, and nothing to fear. You become a mirror no one can distort. Have you noticed how toxic people twist the truth? They say, you're overreacting, when you're finally speaking up. They say, you've changed, when you stop tolerating mistreatment. They say, you're so selfish, when you finally start choosing yourself. But here's what changes when you're integrated. Their words no longer stick. because there's no glue for them to hold on to, no inner doubt, no hidden shame, no unclaimed anger. You hear the insult and it bounces. You sense the manipulation and it stops. You become a mirror they can't distort. And eventually they stop looking into it, because the only people who seek distorted mirrors are those who don't want to see themselves. You stop attracting toxic people, not by hiding, but by glowing. Most people think the way to avoid toxic people is to hide, to get smaller, to be quiet, invisible, but that never works. Because hiding isn't strength, it's fear, and fear is what they feed on. The real answer: glow. Be radiant with your truth. Be bold in your no. Be grounded in your presence. When you're whole, you emit a different frequency. It's not defensive. It's not aggressive. It's sovereign. And that frequency is incomprehensible to toxic people. They don't recognize it. They can't manipulate it. They don't know how to enter it, so they leave. Not because you push them away, but because they realize there is no door. Integration is the end of the cycle. This is the paradox of shadow work. The more darkness you face, the more light you carry. Because the moment you reclaim your wholeness, the cycle ends. You stop attracting teachers in the form of tormentors. You stop reenacting childhood scripts in adult bodies. You stop learning through pain. Instead, you start learning through alignment, through peace, through power. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What's real for me?" You stop fearing abandonment, because you stop abandoning yourself. And that is when true freedom begins. The road ahead. You are not broken, you are split. But every part of you is welcome. The rage, the tenderness, the fear, the craving, the wildness, the quiet. Bring it home. Not to be perfect, but to be whole. Because when you are whole, you become sovereign. And when you are sovereign, you don't chase peace. You are peace. And no one, not a toxic person, not a manipulator, not even your past, can take that away from you.